Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Even Your Dynasty Show. We've got Ricky here today. Caveman is not going to join us today. For those of you that do follow him on X, you know kind of why he's not here right now. He's over taking care of his dad, so send him all your prayers, good well wishes, all that good stuff. Sounds like everything's going pretty well overall, but he's going to go take care of his dad. So we've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about Buster Posey and the impact of, that he's already showing. A little bit maybe about the Willie Adames interview, where I think he already is one of the more likable players we've had come through here. Kind of reminds me a lot of when Jung-Hoo Lee had his press conference last season, where you just kind of immediately gravitate to the guy. He's a really likable player in person. And then, we'll talk a little free agency, a little bit of the international free agency as that comes. We're getting close to January 15th. And obviously there's that Roki Sasaki guy floating around right now that's going to be very influential on the Giants. And what they have some kind of questions they're going to have to answer. And, we'll also talk a little bit about the Kyle Tucker trade, where I think everybody kind of would have loved to have him, but obviously he's over in Chicago now. So we'll talk about the impacts there. So how's it going, Ricky?
Pretty good, man. Excited to talk about all this stuff going on right now. I think we're pretty much in the heart of MLB free agency. Obviously, a few big dominoes have fallen, but still got a lot of talent out there. You got Alonso, Santander, obviously Corbin Burnes. You got Sasaki on the international side. So, and you got the some of the international signings that the Giants might be announcing here in January as well. So, lots to talk about for sure.
Yeah. Nick, I'm going to flag this comment just so you know, because we are definitely going to get to this, because I know Ricky and I kind of have different feelings on this from when we were texting earlier, but we'll for sure dive in on this one. I'm gonna start this one and we'll come back to it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today was, it was really telling because before when they first hired Posey, one of the big things when they brought him in is we were all talking about this is going to be a recruiter. This is going to be somebody that does a good job bringing in free agents, but the problem is the Giants don't really have a history of success in free agency, especially getting top tier talent to come over this way, and especially getting top tier talent on the position player side of things for offensive players. And right away, obviously they've gotten Willie Adames, which is just a huge get for this team. We've gone on and on about all the different ways and all the different needs like he helps this team, and a lot of the ways that he's going to help them now and going forward into the future. The young players, there's so many ways he helps. But when they were doing his press conference and some of the surrounding interviews, one of the first things when they asked him why are you here, and it literally every time he's just Buster Posey, the guy sold me on the vision here. That's why I'm here. I saw what he did as a player. I've listened to him. I believe in what he's going to do. And it's just amazing because we are already seeing the benefits of having this guy at least selling the vision. I don't know how, how much he is coming up with things like the plan and all that. That's where he's probably relying on a lot of guys like Manassian and all these different advisors and other guys that they brought in. But having a guy like that, kind of like John Lynch with San Francisco or with the Niners, when you have these guys to sell to players that have been in their shoes, it's already just great to hear this kind of stuff. And now there's Burnes out there, so what are your thoughts on that?
Couple different things on that. First, on the Posey front, I think it's a huge deal because he's not much older than a lot of these free agents, because they're hitting free agency around 29 to 31 typically. And so a lot of these guys, they look at him as one of the, goats of this generation for baseball. So a lot of these guys are man, even though I can't play with him, I would love to play under him. And there's also, I think, a huge trust factor there with going and signing with a guy that's running the organization, that played the game, that understands, the player side of things, which, obviously I'm not going to touch on, how Farhan did things necessarily, but it's just different. I compare it a lot to, John Lynch with the Niners and how that impacted a lot of players wanting to come and play with the Niners and re-sign with the Niners, because there's that trust factor of knowing a guy was in their shoes before. So I think that makes a huge impact on, bringing in free agents. And I think they see, Buster's vision is very clear, and he's going to be aggressive in trying to bring in that high-end talent to, really fill out the top of the roster. So I think there's that impact. And then I think just going forward, it's a huge deal having a guy with, a ton of leadership qualities going alongside with Chapman, who's also kind of fits that mold. I think these two guys are, guys that can really help continue to recruit other players that, around the league have a ton of respect for these guys.
Yeah, 100%. And, like you said, he's going to continue to be aggressive, and they clearly have a plan right now. Obviously, one of the big things that came out, Pavlovich put out an article, I don't know, a couple of days ago, and he talked about, Posey had convinced ownership, who's, always wanting to be opportunistic, they like to call it, but he's convinced ownership to spend when they weren't really planning on it, which is part of why I was like, let's pump the brakes on the whole freak out about the payroll reduction. I mean, I think we all kind of reasonably expected them to bump back a little bit, but some of the takes that they were going to drop down to some minuscule number relative to their last season payroll, I thought that was a bit of an overreaction. And they still might end up going closer to last season's if they do in fact get Burnes. Although I would anticipate they would end up doing some, we'll call them payroll gymnastics, and being like moving some guys to trying to add some other guys in. But one of the things is that he allegedly convinced ownership to spend, and there were a lot of things, and I'm not trying to sit here and go bag on Farhan. He's gone. Yeah. Like we're moving on from there. But like that's one of those skills for an executive. And I understand he's in ownership and he has like a 4% stake in the team. And it's a little bit more of a direct path. But the reality is he's a minority owner, so he still has to get approval from the majority to sign off on spending this kind of money they want to. And his ability to, having the ability to convince ownership to spend more is a skill. And it's just as important as being able to negotiate with these players, is being able to get your ownership to, sign off on writing these big checks. So clearly he's a step forward on that front. And, we'll see kind of going forward. And if this continues, and I can't say I don't lack confidence in I can't say I do lack confidence in him, because he's already proving that he's going to go out there and do what it takes to try and put a winner out there, which it's exciting. It's just a breath of fresh air, honestly.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to, obviously we can't expect the guy to flip over the roster overnight, but it's ultimately identifying the weakest spots on the roster and plugging those holes with full-time guys. There's nothing wrong with going and platooning a few, 2-3 starting positions. That's fine. That's totally normal. You see teams like the Dodgers do it almost every single year, but it really comes down to bringing in leaders and having solidified roles. Even the 2010 Giants and all those championship years, we had guys platooning and left in some of these weaker spots, but ultimately start filling out the top of that roster, fill out the middle of your lineup, and then you can kind of go from there, platoon some of these younger guys and see who can kind of separate themselves from the pack, is kind of where I'm at. Now with, Corbin Burnes, I think he's going to continue to be aggressive with him and trying to make sure he brings in a guy like that, because just like Adames, he's trying to identify high-end players that also really want to be here, that you're not having to completely overpay for, because they actually want to be a part of what's going on over here. And then, that really affects the clubhouse. And I feel like that's something that's really lacked the last, say 6-7 years. There's just not a ton of leadership. You had Crawford there, but, for the most part, in all these years when Posey's been gone, off and on, you haven't really had those true leaders. I think we saw some of that with Chapman, but I think you'll see even more of it with Adames this year. A little bit more vocal of a player than Chapman. Chapman's more of kind of a lead by example guy for the most part. So I think it's going to be huge, and I think we'll continue to see it pay dividends in free agency.
Yeah. I can't wait to see the impact it has on the younger players, having a guy like Willie around. I mean, you hear him talk about all the young players in San Francisco right now. And, I like his answer where he's like, I think these guys are going to be superstars. And then he clarified, and he's like, I don't mean they're going to be a 10-time All-Star or anything like that. He just thinks that these guys can all take the step forward to being like highly productive players in Major League Baseball. So I love a guy that clearly wants to take these guys under his wing. He wants to help them learn what it means to be a pro. He wants to help them learn what it means to be a winner. Because this is a guy that has won everywhere he's been at. It's just he was that press conference. He's just such a likable person. Like I'd only heard like maybe one interview of his before, and it was like in season. So you only get kind of a little bit because they're usually just talking about like a previous game, but just his mindset, his background, everything. It was a really impressive press conference in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt. I just love to see the excitement of a guy like wanting to be here. It shows that, how BS some of the narratives that were going around for the last handful of years were about people not wanting to play here. It's, if you show that you're convicted in what you're doing and that you are determined to build a winner here and they trust you, people will come and play here. Like, ultimately, despite what people say, this is a very nice area. There are a lot of very nice places to live out here. And while it is expensive, you can definitely attract people here. This isn't like playing in Ohio or something like that. You know what I mean? You can absolutely attract players here. You just got to show that you're convicted in what you're doing. I think Buster's absolutely done that. Going off of Adames and some of the young players too, he's a Dominican guy, and so is Luciano. Obviously, Luciano came up playing the same position. It'd be interesting to see, what kind of impact a guy, coming from the same area as Luciano, Adames could have on him. So that's something I haven't really heard discussed a lot. We haven't really heard too much about Luciano in the offseason, but that could be something that would be interesting to see develop, in the offseason or in spring training, I should say.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be awesome. So I want to touch on what Tom says here, because I agree, and I like this. He said, I was pleasantly surprised I got Adames. I recognize we can't fix it all in one season, but I really think Burnes is an opportunity combined with Webb to reduce the overtaxation of the pen. And I 100% agree. I 100% agree with that first part of that sentence. Like, I think that's something that a lot of us, especially as we look at the Giants' current financial situation, like, we have to come to the realization that they're not going to fix it all right now. The only way they could fix it all, so to speak, realistically, without going like well over the tax, is going to be if some young guys just absolutely take off internally. If a Bryce Eldridge comes in and steps up, and all of a sudden he's your middle of the order bat and takes over first base. If Matos or McRae just takes off and you're able to move off of a Yaz in right field, like that's how you plug all your holes in one offseason. They're not going to be able to do it all externally. They're going to have to kind of pick and choose where they, fill needs via free agency and possibly the trade market. I think Bricky and I both agree that we expect a guy like Zach Manassian to be pretty active on the trade market. But the problem is it's really volatile and you don't know who's going to be available. So, we kind of got to wait and see there. But I agree with this. I think Burnes' ability to eat up innings and be a horse at the top of the line or top of the rotation with Webb, you could probably rely on 190 innings plus out of both of those guys. And I personally think if Robbie Ray is healthy next season, he's going to give you 160 or 170 innings, something around that. he is proven to. Sorry, house is like shaking or something. Dude, we getting like an earthquake here? What the heck? That's so
weird.
Yeah, weird. Sorry,
Thought
everybody.
I heard.
Yeah, can you hear something like rattling right now?
I heard a minor little rattling, nothing crazy, but
Yeah, that's nuts. For those wondering, I'm up in Washington State, so you guys probably aren't feeling it where you're at, but that's really weird. Nice. Okay. That definitely didn't get me off my train of thought or anything. Yeah, Yellowstone, it's all over, folks. I love it. But going back to what Tom said, yeah, I mean, we're not going to be able to fix it all, but if, like, also kind of to Ricky's point, if we can fill in a couple of the top, those 1 through 5 spots on the roster, the high end talent, if we can fill a couple of those in, you have Chapman, who's kind of, I feel like, he fits that mold, although you probably want him to be like your 5th best player in a perfect world. They have Webb up there. They now have Adames. If they can get a Burnes, I feel like they're kind of missing that very top guy, that superstar to kind of tie everything together and take pressure off of everyone. But it would be just a massive step in the right direction. And then it starts to become plugging holes and creating a team that can, beat you in different ways and stuff like that. So I agree with what Tom said here.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you've touched on this a ton in the past where, bringing in a guy like Burnes versus Snell definitely helps you a lot more during the regular season because, you're filling up those innings. And I think we can honestly say that's been one of the biggest killers for the team the last few years, where they have like a nice little run and they can't sustain it because the pen's just getting killed. Because, you get to the point where you're only running out 2 guys in the rotation and then everything else is just, straight up bullpen, by committee, openers, all that. And it just kills you in the long run when you get to, July and August. So I think filling up those 2 spots and then, like you said, with Ray, everything becomes a lot easier and you're shortening games. And then, if you bring in Burnes, you can honestly probably turn your focus away from the rotation and maybe try to fill up, one more spot in the pen for the later innings. And then you might have a damn good pitching staff. When you look at possibly a Camilo Duvall bounce back, assuming they do hold on to him, and then you pair him with Walker, say you get a Tanner Scott. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen there. There hasn't been a ton of talk, but you could get a guy like that. And then you still have the Roger brothers, assuming, Taylor doesn't get traded. You have a pretty deep pitching staff with a lot less pressure being put on that younger group of arms between, Harrison, Wisenhunt, Black, Roop, all these guys. So
yeah, 100%.
That's kind of where I'm at.
I know last year, like one of the frustrating things early in the year in particular was it always felt like one part of their game would just let them down on any given day. Like you would look and they would be a right around average staff and then like a right around average pen and then like right around average offense. But then they were, 6 games under 500. I mean, realistically, they hovered around 500 for much of the year. I don't think they ever got below 6 games under, and they never got more than like 3 games over all season. But it seemed like every day it was one part of their game would let them down, whether it was, they'd lose a game 2-1 because they couldn't score or couldn't get the hit they needed. Or they'd have a game where they'd lose, 7-5, where they actually got 5 runs, but the pitching melted down. Or they'd have a lead late in the game and the bullpen melted down. And it's like, I feel like this team has the makings of a really good pen. And if you can at least make that reliable, like that could have flipped a bunch of games last season because they did have a lot of struggles, in particular when the pen just got absolutely taxed early in the year, like you said, because for 2 straight seasons, they operated with like 2 to 3 starters for months on end and ended up with just, a bullpen that was just gassed for the rest of the season. So if they can at least shore up one of those and, not blow so many late leads like they did this last season, that by itself would be a big step forward. And Ryan Walker, I see Frederick mentioning him. He needs to get shut down because he got so, he got pretty overused last season, and I would agree there. And also with Frederick's point that Rodriguez in long relief, that I about threw a fit last season during some of his outings, but they have a lot of young, talented guys in the pen right now. Walker obviously looks like he's just absolutely nasty, and he could be a really good closer. Doval, if he bounces back, that's going to be a 7th or 8th inning guy. Tyler Rogers has been super reliable in the 8th inning over the last 4 or 5 years, whatever it's been. Taylor is a reliable left-handed arm. Eric Miller got more and more, they put more and more faith in him as the season went. He started getting more and more late inning opportunities. Even guys like Sean Jelly had their moments. Spencer Bivens had his moments. They have a couple guys down in Sacramento that could potentially be options next season. Guys like Juan Sanchez, that could be a lefty if they're looking for another one. Landon Roop, he pitched out of the pen last season. I like him as a potential starter, but there just might not be a spot for him this season, so he could end up in kind of like a bulk inning swing role type thing. Tristan Beck's going to be back. Trevor, I haven't even brought up Trevor McDonald yet. You might have mentioned it, but Trevor McDonald, he has just a nasty slider that could pitch really well out of the pen. A guy like Keaton Wynn, they have so many arms right now in this pen, and if they can at least nail that down, you can shorten some games. And if they get a Burnes to go with that, where you have two times through the rotation where your pen's thinking, yeah, we're going to get maybe not a whole day off, but we're going to, a lot of us ain't going to be throwing today. It does a lot for this team going forward.
And I'm glad you named off all those guys, because it kind of just goes to show, like, for people that don't cover the minors as closely, there's a ton of depth in the upper minors it's all these guys that are kind of in between Sacramento and being big league ready and kind of just need the opportunity to play. And I've said it multiple times. I'd like to see them really kind of trade from that depth and, bring in more hitting, like a Cody Bellinger, from having so many of those guys, because you just don't have enough spots for all these guys. Yeah, you're going to have to fill out some of the roster in Sacramento, but you honestly have too many guys there, and some of these guys still do have a lot of potential that other teams, I think, would totally be interested in. And I think hopefully this year, assuming, we can start the season with mostly everybody healthy, you can see guys in actual clear-cut roles, because I think a huge issue last year, as you're touching on, is guys were just miscast in horrible roles. Like Rodriguez being in middle relief with like late inning potential just made no sense. That's just not who he is. And then Landon Roop started the year out of the pen because he earned a spot on the opening day roster. But then he's being used in the late innings, and he's like a fastball curveball kind of guy. He's somebody that is a starter. Like he just doesn't fit out of the pen, especially in late innings. Like he's not the kind of guy you want in there in the 7th or 8th. That's just not who he is. So it's, and then getting Tristan Beck back obviously makes a huge difference too, just filling out the middle of the pen. So I would really like to see them trade from that depth for sure. And I think there's plenty of assets there to actually bring in a decent player.
Yeah, I agree. Their starting pitching, or just pitching depth in general, that is clearly the organizational strength right now. Now, what can it land? I don't know, but I feel like they have the assets to be able to get something. It's just a matter of who's out there. I saw somebody mention, maybe you can pay, you can trade from that to get a Cody Bellinger, and maybe Chicago will pay part of the deal. I don't know. If Chicago is willing to pay a good chunk of that deal, I would, at least for this next season's salary, I think it's something the Giants should heavily consider. You brought up like Yandy Diaz, that he's only making like $8 million. Like that would be a good option to try and get. But like they have so much pitching, and it's just, and there are some really nice arms down in the lower levels still. Guys like Joe Whitman, who peaked at high A. And they have, it's funny. I listed all these guys out of the pen, and I didn't even list the guy that might end up being one of the best of that bunch. That's down in Double A right now. That's Trent Harris, who I honestly think is
Yeah.
going to be in the pen at some point before the season ends. That guy is flat out nasty. So
Yeah. I was gonna say, he's a guy that could legitimately, and I mean this with all seriousness, he could legitimately end up being in the big league pen, and be pitching in the late innings at some point this year. Like he's that nasty. If any of you guys aren't familiar with Trent Harris, you definitely gotta look up his strikeout to walk ratio and look how many strikeouts he's averaging per nine. It's pretty crazy, and his ERA is extremely low the last 2 seasons. So he's been a quick riser in the system, and he's a guy you could see be the team's closer, honestly, in within a year or two. So, yeah, no, that's just, making the point here. And the thing is to get a guy like Yandy Diaz or even Cody Bellinger, assuming, you're not having, say, the Cubs take on a bunch of Bellinger's money this year or next year, you're not looking at really needing to trade like a Harrison or Wisenhunt, in my opinion, or a Birdsong. You could absolutely trade, though, two of those arms we just mentioned out of that group, and you'd still be fine. We didn't even mention Reggie Crawford either, obviously coming back from injury, but it's like there are so many guys just log jammed in, that Sacramento to SF area or level. And you really do, I think, at some point need to trade from that depth. Otherwise, you run into a situation like we have in years past where you get these guys that get these small sample sizes up in the big leagues, and then they may not do as well, and then it just ruins their value because you didn't trade them while their value was up. So be smart, trade from that depth, just trade from your pitching group and hold on to as many of these young hitters as you can, and kind of try to identify this year who's going to stick, between Matos and Luciano and Schmidt and all those guys.
Yeah. That's where it's like that's where I don't like having a guy like Jordan Hicks on the roster right now, where he needs to not be starting, but frankly, like there's so many guys I'd rather see in the pen over him. Maybe he changes my mind if they just put him in the pen right away and he was just coming out throwing 104. Like, yeah, all right, maybe my opinion will change rapidly when I actually get to see that on our team. But like after watching last season, it's really hard with that because there's a lot of like young explosive arms they have, and they're not paying them $11 million. So like that's the rough thing with Hicks. I mean, and the one guy I didn't even mention is their former first round pick. That what happens if Will Bednar figures out how to throw strikes? Like that's a dude with 3+ pitches. Like if he could find the strike zone, all of a sudden he could be nasty and a late inning guy. So there's just so many arms. So I hope we can see them make a trade and try and get at least some kind of young bat, maybe a controllable bat that has shown some solid potential and production in the majors. It doesn't have to be like a star or anything like that, but like if you're looking at like St. Louis, who has a few guys, I think like Gorman and even a Jordan Walker, who probably, I mean, he's a guy that they maybe have soured on a little bit, but maybe for the Giants you can take a shot on him. There's a few different guys in different organizations that are young, controllable, high upside bats that you could maybe trade from that and see if you can hit on a guy.
It's kind of funny you mentioned the Jordan Hicks role in the rotation, because I was just thinking in a hypothetical trade for Bellinger, I almost wonder if they'd be interested in Hicks because he's making less than half of what Bellinger's making per year. And when you really look at who they have on their active roster currently, they could absolutely use him both in the rotation or in the pen. They have Steele and Imanaga at the top of the rotation. Imanaga might not be there for another year or two. And then you're looking at Matthew Boyd and a bunch of no-name guys. They have that Javier Assad guy. He's a younger player, and he wasn't too bad for them. But, they have a lot of unknowns in their rotation and in their pen, and that's a team that might honestly be willing to take on a guy like that, especially when you think of, Bellinger being kind of a salary dump for them. Hicks is only making about 12 mil a year. Bellinger's slated to make, I think, 27 this year, and then has a player option that he can opt into next year for another 25. So, they would be saving a ton of money on that, and they would get a quality player. And you could even send them a Lamont Wade Jr., and it's another player that can contribute now if they're interested in him. I don't think they would want Yaz after bringing in Tucker, but, that might not be a bad move for them. Or maybe you just send them another high upside upper minors arm like you did when you sent Caleb Killian over there in the Chris Bryant trade years ago. Yeah. So that's another option too, because I could definitely see Hicks being somebody they trade if say Harrison and Birdsong get off to a hot start this year. They might see Hicks is just taking up a spot, and why waste the payroll on a guy making $12 million if you're not going to end up throwing him back in the pen.
Yeah. It feels about right, honestly. Like maybe like 115.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, a little bit above league average. He's a guy who has rebounded since he's gone to Chicago, but he still is kind of one of those guys that gets a little streaky as well. But usually his numbers do end up averaging out over the course of a full season.
Yeah. To me, if he can show up and play well above average defense, either in right field or first base, whichever one you put him at, and if he could swipe you 15 to 20 bags, and he maintains kind of what his strikeout rate is, and he can be consistently put the ball in play, cut back on the Ks, and be solid, above average with runners in scoring position, I think we would all take this. I don't think. The contract is what it is, but if you're able to offload some money going back to Chicago, or they eat part of his contract, or whatever the case may be in that trade, I think you would just kind of bite the bullet on it, and you'd just be happy with that production, especially if you go get a Burnes and then you've already added a Adames, because then he's not like the superstar presence, but he is a lefty. He balances the lineup out a little bit, and he could bring some things the team lacks. So I think we would all be happy with
versatility, defensive versatility more than anything. He's a guy that can hit right around you could hit him towards the top, or you could hit him, 5 or 6, and it just gives the middle of your order a little bit more depth. You get more athleticism, and, say you need to give Lee a breather, you throw Bellinger over in center. More often than not, you can just start him at first, and then you're not relying on Lamont Wade Jr. if you do keep him around as an everyday player. So, there's a lot of reasons to like that, and you're not going to be tied financially to him long term. If he goes off for you this year, he opts out of his contract and hits free agency. Okay, no problem.
Thanks, dude.
All good. We'll take that all day.
Yeah.
If he doesn't do as well, or he's just not, living up to, the 25 million he can opt into next year, you deal with it for 1 year, you bite the bullet, all good. But you still have his defense you can rely on. This is not a bat first player, especially at this stage in his career. So I think there's a lot of ways you can get a Bellinger contract done. Of course, we're hearing all the rumors towards New York, but you just never know with trades and what, New York might be willing to give up for a guy like Bellinger, who is, like I said, more of a salary dump, in a trade for the Cubs.
Yeah, Cole, the one thing I would say is if you're trading for Cody Bellinger, like, Chicago's not getting a quote good young guy out of this unless they're eating a big chunk of salary. And even then, they're not going to get like a top prospect. It's going to be just kind of like a toolsy guy in A-ball, or the Giants will throw back one of their young pitchers, not like one of the top guys, but maybe like a Trevor McDonald, who, yeah, he could still be a really productive major leaguer. But I don't view him as – I don't think he's a closer, and I don't think he's a starter because I don't believe in his throwing motion. Like, I just long-term, I don't see his arm holding up in a starter role. But I think he could be a pretty good, like, high-leverage reliever at some point. down the road. But you might trade a guy like that if Chicago eats a bunch of money. But at that point, you're not worried about it because you're not paying that much. Realistically, though, they're wanting to get out of the salary, so you're probably going to trade them next to nothing, or you're going to trade them a little bit of salary back, and it's just going to be them dumping the salary and next year's commitment on potential commitment on you. So you shouldn't have to give up much in that trade.
Yeah, and I'm not saying, go and give up Hicks and Wade Jr. in a trade, but I'm saying one of those guys makes a ton of sense. I honestly see if we were to trade for Bellinger, a package looking like one of those veteran type guys or a Yaz, if they're still interested in him. And then, then that's when you pair, maybe a prospect that hasn't really panned out thus far with a little bit more upside. You could throw in a Will Bednar. He's fallen way down the ranks. He's been stuck way lower in the lower levels because of injury. But he showed you a little potential last year. So, that's not something that would hurt the Giants. Yes, it was a first round pick, but that was years ago. They've already kind of moved on from that. He's not even a ranked prospect for the Giants anymore. And like I said, it doesn't hurt you. Some point you need to trade from some of this depth because otherwise these guys are going to go nowhere because you just do not have enough spots for all of these young arms, plain and simple.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Nick, I agree. They could use a lefty in this lineup. The one thing I will say about Adames, the positive for Willy Adames is he actually has reverse splits. If you look at his numbers, he's like 17 or 20% better than league average against righties, but then he's like a little bit worse than league average against lefties. So the reverse splits do help you a little bit in that one. Not the sexiest guy, but or sexiest player to want to bring in, but this is where I could see a Carlos Santana being a fit if you're just trying to plug a hole on the roster and get a lefty. Well, I think he switch hits, but a guy that's going to hit from the left side most of the season. I could see a Carlos Santana being a guy that comes in. A guy that you could plug into the 4 or 5, 5 spot. It's not ideal. Obviously, you'd like a bigger bat in that spot, but you can do it to split some of these guys up. So,
yeah, I mean, seeing some of the comments too, what people are thinking as far as, the Cubs not wanting to eat any of the money on the contract. And that's again where I say trade one of these veteran guys on the roster who may not be making a ton of money, but you're basically trading some salary. The Giants aren't going to take on that full $27 million from Bellinger because they're also getting rid of a contract like a Yaz who's what is he making, like $9 million right now?
Quarter.
Yeah, $9.25. So you're taking on, really not a huge salary when you're talking about a player like Bellinger. It's way more feasible when you're shipping out a salary like that. Or like I said, a Hicks, because you're trading away $12 million in salary. You basically be taking on $15 million. And why wouldn't you take on $15 million for, 1 year or maybe 2 years at most of Bellinger? So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, you could do Hicks. You could do maybe. Their bullpen isn't great. Maybe they would want a Taylor Rogers back. It's a 1 year expiring deal. Yeah, I'm sure. Did they want to pay Taylor Rogers $12 million or 12.5 or whatever he makes this season? No, nobody wants to be paying him that next season. But if it meant they got out of $17 million of Bellinger's deal or $15 million of Bellinger's deal, they'd probably run right. They'd be thrilled to do that deal. Or maybe you can send a Lamont Wade back who only is going to make $4.7 or so million next season. He would be could be a solid bench piece for them. It's like they could try and they could take a major leaguer back easily in that deal. There was a few other trades that got kind of thrown out there. A few other guys. Someone brought up. I can't find the quote or I can't find the comments, but Jared Jones' name has been thrown out there. Former second-round pick for Pittsburgh. Supposedly he's available in a trade. Now, I caution doing business with Pittsburgh. They seem to fleece us every time. Maybe with Manassian, we'll see there. the other one I saw, someone mentioned Shane McClanahan. I don't know his contract situation, so I can't comment too much on that one. So, Ricky, do you know what his contract situation might be? I know he's like 27 in Tampa, but
yeah, I was
contract matters for them if they're going to trade him. You know,
McClanahan, he has basically 3 ARB years, including this year. It looks like he's slated at 3.6 mil this year with 2 more years, and he wouldn't enter free agency until his age 31 season. So, yes, he's coming off an injury, but, you know, the talent's there, so you're probably going to pay a decent prospect price. So,
yeah.
For a high-end arm like that, that's more, in my opinion, somebody you pivot to if you don't get Burnes, you know. That could be a guy you take on and see what you can do. But I mean, ultimately, like I said, there's a ton of depth there. You can afford to trade a handful of arms if McClanahan's the type of guy you want to go after. I mean, he's right in the middle of his prime. But yeah, like I said, I don't see them doing that unless they don't get Burnes. So
yeah, I think that's exactly kind of where I stand on this whole thing. Is let's let the Burnes thing shake out, and then go from there. Now, I did start this comment earlier. We're going to bring it back up to the screen. Nick said, the longer the Burnes negotiations go on, the better or worse it is for the Giants. So this is where we kind of have differing feelings, because Ricky was like, man, I don't like the feeling of this earlier. He texted us and he's like, I don't like the fact that this is dragging. And my personal feeling is, being a Giants fan and watching the Giants be on the other side of this coin for multiple years, and honestly decades at this point. I mean, I still remember guys like Lester and some of these other guys when they were free agents, and it just always felt like the Giants were, you know, that they were making the we didn't get a rose comments and all the stuff, where every time it seemed like we come down to the wire and then they would pick another team. And it always felt like the Giants were being used to get more money out of someone else. And there were always reasons that we were trying to convince ourselves, or that it could make sense for a free agent to choose the Giants, when almost all logical reason pointed to them wanting to go to the other team. This is like one of the few times where I look at this situation with Corbin Burnes, and if it really does come down to the Giants and the Blue Jays, there is absolutely no reason in hell Corbin Burnes should pick the Blue Jays if the offers are even in the like same area code. Like, if you think the Giants system is bad, the Blue Jays system is just as bad. The Giants have more young talent on their major league roster right now than the Blue Jays do. Like, that just is what it is. The counter argument is, you could say Vladdy Jr. and Bo are still there, and they're both young players, but both guys have 1 year on their contract left. There is so much instability going on in Toronto right now. He's a West Coast guy. He has a house in Scottsdale. He can go live in Arizona and be with his family for an extra month and a half out of the year because the spring training's not in Florida, which, you know, people can pay, you know, they can move, so whatever on that. But, like, does this guy really want to go rot away in Canada for the next 8 years? And I'm not trying to, like, disrespect Canada, but also, like, everything points to him wanting to go to the Giants. So I personally am of the belief that even if this drags on a little bit, it is simply Scott Boras doing what Scott Boras does, and he is trying to squeeze every last dollar out of the Giants, because that's where Burnes actually wants to be versus Toronto. So that's my opinion on it. At some point, I do feel like Toronto is so desperate that they're going to just continually overbid whatever the Giants put out there. They'll just up the bid. And at some point, I think the Giants are going to have to call the bluff and basically be like, if you want to go ride in Toronto, be our guest, but this is our final offer. And either he's going to sign, or he's going to sign some astronomical money. Because I don't think it's as simple as, oh, just cave and give the guy $37 million a year or whatever for 9 years. Like, at some point, you're just being irresponsible. So I do think they do need to draw a line at some point. And we'll see. Is Burnes about getting every dollar, or is he want to be somewhere where he thinks is trending the right way on the, you know, in the location he wants for what will still be life-changing money at the end of the day. So,
and there's always the factor of, you know, you're not moving to Toronto for a season or two before you hit free agency. This is the end of your career. Like, you're going to be entering your late 30s by the time you get to move out of Canada. So, I mean, who knows what the guy's wishes are, but it kind of does feel like the Giants are at a point where they kind of have drawn that line in the sand, because I mean, we've been hearing for what, 2 to 3 days now, at least, that this deal is imminent, where he chooses between the Blue Jays and the Giants, and nothing's really happened. So it almost seems like they are at a little bit of a standstill, and it's kind of up to him to decide, how badly he might want to extra maybe 10 mil over 8 years, or an extra year on his deal with, the Blue Jays. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I'm more so worried just from years past of where the Giants have gotten burned, but this situation is a little bit different just because he is somewhat of a local. Bakersfield isn't quite the Bay Area, but he did play college ball out here, so that is a factor. And then his lady being from here. Honestly, the last time I remember the Giants being in a situation like this was, I want to say, CC Sabathia back in the day. When he ended up choosing the Yankees and signing that long-term deal. It felt like the Giants were going to get him, but ultimately they did end up getting played, a la John Lester and some of those other guys. But the Giants also
too, and the Giants sucked at the time.
Exactly. The Giants, that was right before they went on their World Series runs, right before, Timmy and Kane and all these guys, all those guys came up. So, I don't know. It does feel likely that this is going to happen. Maybe tonight, we're lucky. Maybe early tomorrow morning. It does feel like it's any moment now. This thing's going to happen because there's just been no other traction. I've seen rumors of, maybe the Red Sox get back into conversations. I don't think so. All along, they've more so needed a lefty starter, and they got that with Crochet in that trade. I don't see them wanting to overpay for Burnes after getting that kind of a trade done when you just gave up a massive prospect haul. I think they're going to be more focused on hitting now. I've heard maybe the Yankees, but then again, it's like you have a pretty deep rotation already as is. A high-end starting pitcher, really they're concerned? Probably not, when you're still looking to replace Juan Soto. So,
yeah. I could see there were some rumors that the Cubs are trying to acquire a starter now. So maybe Chicago's getting ready to just fork out all the money, and, it'll be interesting on if they're willing to put out some huge contract offer to him. And even then, I mean, is it somewhere that he wants to be? I mean, I would feel more threatened if Boston, New York, Chicago were the team that's putting this enormous offer in front of Burnes. Like if one of those teams was willing to overpay, pay well beyond the Giants, then I'd probably be like, yeah, I'm sweating this one a little bit. They're going to have to make a decision if they want to just meet his demands. But with Toronto, it's like, this team is one of there are so many situations that could potentially be better than the Giants. Toronto is not one of them. Like, the Giants are genuinely a better situation than Toronto. And I say that like 100% confidence. Unless they turn around and they go lock up Vladdy Jr., that'd be about the only thing that could make it close. Because as long as he's a pending free agent, our situation's better right now as of today. So, we'll see.
And that goes right back into the Adama signing. That's a clear-cut direction. We're trying to win right now. This isn't a long-term move. Like, we're trying to win right now, so that's why we're trying to acquire you. We're trying to fill that void that Snell left behind. Versus, like you said, the Blue Jays, it's what is their direction? Are they really going to sign Bo and Vladdy? Because every report we've heard has been quite the opposite, that they're going to choose between one or the two. So if you're a guy like Burnes, do you really want to get the bag? And then you're basically all they end up with, other than maybe signing one of those two to an extension. There's just a lot of uncertainty there. And for once the Giants kind of feel like they're moving in one clear-cut direction, and that's just winning right now. So
I don't even know if Jays keep one of those guys. Honestly, at this point, it feels like they've kind of soured on Bo, and they're hoping that he gets especially if they fall out of it. I think Bo gets traded. I don't think they're going to trade Vladdy. I think they're going to hold on to him and just hope they can re-sign him in free agency, because I don't think Vladdy wants to sign an extension. I think he wants to hit free agency.
Yeah,
because he saw what Soto just got, and also like they've kind of said that he wants to see a commitment to winning out of the Jays and like see a direction. And like, I mean, even if they get Corbin Burnes, they're such a flawed roster that it's like, is he really going to just look at it and go, oh, they got Burnes, now I'll sign my extension? Like, he'll still probably hit free agency. And at that point, it's anybody's guess where he ends up.
Yeah, and I mean, do you really want to pitch in, Rogers Center over, Oracle? Probably not. But I mean, we'll see. I mean, ultimately, that's what Gausman had to do, and he kind of declined. He had to, he was really good that first year after leaving the Giants when they didn't want to sign him. But
second year he was good too, right? In the second half last year, he was pretty dominant. First half,
yeah, he rebounded for sure. But it's like ultimately, what is the vision over there? You're in the AL East. You're competing with Baltimore. Good luck. The Yankees. Good luck. I mean, even the Red Sox have a great farm system, and they still have talent on their major league roster, so they're going to be probably at least somewhat relevant. Will compete for a wild card, I'm sure. And then you have Tampa, who's always hanging around as well. So it's like, where do the Jays fall? Do you really want to be a part of that for 8 years? About as far away from your family as you can get on top of it.
Yeah. I can't buy for a second that he's going to go to Toronto unless the Giants like bow out, and Toronto's just got the biggest offer by like a country mile. But good to see you, Dan. Figure you guys just probably wrapped up your guys' show. But yeah, Dan says Vladdy turned down $340 million. I don't think any offer that doesn't start with at least a 4 is even going to get a second look from Vladdy and his people. And Vladdy is not a Boris client, so that's a positive for next offseason. Neither is Kyle Tucker if he ends up hitting free agency next year, which I have my doubts that the Cubs will be able to get him to an extension. I think anything that starts with less than a 3, for his extension is going to get laughed at by his representation, and it might even. Ricky and I were floating out numbers because of some of the deals that guys have gotten recently. And I wouldn't be shocked if even a Kyle Tucker signs like a 12-year, $420 million contract. That's $35 million annually. Like I can see that. He'll be 29. He'll be entering his age 29 season. Pays him from 29 to age 40. I could see that. I think it'd be kind of nuts. But if the Giants get Burnes and they're feeling good about Eldridge and they think they're like a piece away from being able to compete for championships, you might just do it and take a chance. So crazy.
Yeah, and Vladdy's kind of in the same boat as Tucker as far as entering free agency at a relatively young age. Vladdy's only going to be 27 next year as a free agent, so he's going to get the bag for sure. Same with Tucker, and obviously Tucker goes from Houston, which is a good hitter's park, and then now is in Chicago, equally as good, if not better, especially after like April or mid-May. He's going to probably absolutely rake if he stays healthy out there. But, I mean, I think going to Chicago, honestly, I think it's that much more likely Tucker doesn't even want to discuss an extension just because the Cubs are in kind of a weird territory. I mean, they don't really have the roster to be a serious contender, in my opinion. They have some really nice pieces, but it's a very flawed roster with, they have a ton of really talented high-end prospects on their farm. I think they have like 8 top 100 guys, but they don't really seem like a team that's going to be winning right now that he might want to re-up with, at least during the season. Maybe they bring him back and throw him the bag, after the season ends or something. But I think both those guys are going to enter free agency, and guess who's going to be right back to bidding for the top guys again? The Yankees. So I think both those guys are going to be waiting for that,
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe
the Yankees go get I'm kind of hoping they get Alonso, honestly.
That would be really
one
funny.
of the New York teams to keep Alonso because I want them to block off first base, and don't they still have Stanton for a few more years? So I'm not sure if they have the DH spot open up. So it'd be great if they just went ahead and blocked themselves from having an opening for Vladdy and removed themselves from that potentially. Because, I would love for the Giants to be able to not have those guys because the Dodgers aren't going to chase Vladdy. Like that's going to be the one team that gets involved in all these guys. And you look at the Dodgers, they got Freddie and they've got Shohei, and they have nowhere to put them. So that's a benefit for the rest of baseball. So
they could say screw it and go after Tucker though, because you can throw him in right field,
and they will.
So yeah, but 500 million,
400 deferred.
I don't know. Vladdy honestly might be a guy, unlike Soto, that the Giants actually try to aggressively pursue next year. If they have a really big offseason this year and get back into the playoffs, that might be a guy that they really pursue and take serious. I mean, Posey kind of touched on the Soto deal and why they didn't really seriously pursue him. It was more like kind of having a gut feel and seeing him as a guy that probably won't come here, and kind of just really focused his sights on a guy like Adames, who you really needed to fill that shortstop void. So that was another thing to take away from some recent comments that I thought was huge. Because I mean, I've said it many times on here. That was one of the biggest mistakes the Giants made when they pursued. I think it was the Judge offseason when there was 5 big time shortstops out there, and we wasted our time with Judge, who it felt like was never going to come here all along. And you left 5 shortstops to go sign elsewhere, other than Correa. We almost had Correa, but we decided to look into his physical right before the presser.
Dude, somebody tried to correct me on my tweet when I jokingly was like, "Wait, you mean we don't want to wait until an hour before a press conference to look over someone's physical?" And someone's like, "Well, actually, it's because the winter meetings." And I'm like, "Dude, I just sent the joke going over their head." Like, what are we doing here? Of course, I understand the situation. I'm just joking. Like, come on, man. But yeah, I think for sure this team is going to be, if they do get Burnes and they get under the tax for a year and they feel like they're about one, if Eldridge comes up at some point, starts looking good, and they feel like they're one, middle of the order impact bat away from being like an actual contender. Like, yeah, they probably won't win the West, but like being a team that can go toe to toe with LA in a short series, like if they feel like they're a piece away, I don't think Posey will hesitate to basically look at guys like, Vladdy and Tucker and be like ready to back up the Brinks truck for those guys. Like, I think he will recognize where the team stands. So, we'll see. It starts with, it started with Adames. We'll see what happens with Burnes. The next ones to talk about right here, what if they don't get Burnes? And one guy, even if they got Burnes, they're going to chase him. That's Sasaki. But what if they don't get Burnes? Where do they turn from there? Flaherty's out there. I'm not the biggest Jack Flaherty guy, I will say. It's just not my cup of tea. He just feels like a Dodger, honestly, more than anything. And I just don't like him. Kind of just hope he goes elsewhere. But then, funny enough, another guy that was a Dodger, I'd be all for, and that's a Walker Buehler, because me personally, I feel like it'd be like a 1-year prove-it deal or a 1-and-1.
Yeah.
It felt like he figured something out once the playoffs rolled around. It finally looked like he was starting to get healthy a little bit and kind of figured something out. I feel like being healthy all offseason, knowing that he's playing for that big contract, I could see him being a guy that would be like, he could come here in a pitcher's park, having just a great season, and then he's going to end up walking. But it kind of would fill the hole for 2025 at least. I think he's a guy that you could get a really good year out of, which I know everybody doesn't want to have this 1 year and gone stuff, but like if you are trying to win, like that's kind of, I'm okay with that for a year.
Yeah, it really all depends on your options, because it's, once Burnes is gone, you don't have another super high-end arm like that really out there that the Giants are going to pivot towards. You get Burnes on a long-term deal, or you can choose from Flaherty, Buehler, or you can just go hard after Sasaki on the international market. But I mean, we obviously know how that could impact other international free agents that the Giants might be trying to bring in. So there's a lot of risk attached to that too, even though you're not going to be forking out the same level of cash.
Yeah. Well, Frederick, we'll get Walker Buehler from Farhan's flexible spending account that he left for the Giants. Dan says, do we think the Giants made a mistake not going strong after Tucker now that they appear to be going all in by signing Chapman and Damas? Maybe they did, but Houston didn't like their package. I'm going to be honest, I don't know if the Giants could stomach the kind of risk that Chicago took because we don't have the system they have. And if Tucker is closed off to signing an extension, I mean, what would the equivalent for us be in our system? Because Cam Smith is a little bit higher rated than Tibbs, but supposedly Houston wanted corner infielders. So yeah, I mean, prospect wise, it's Tibbs ish from Cam Smith standpoint, and then Paredes is. I mean, what would that be? I mean, we don't have a third baseman that would be. I mean, we like Casey Schmidt, but Paredes is more established, so Casey doesn't carry the value of Paredes.
You'd probably be looking at a little bit bigger of a package as far as, Tibbs is a little bit of a downgrade from Smith, even though Tibbs was ironically on his college team and the better player and got drafted one spot before him. But Smith had a nice little run last year in the minors, and then he's a little bit more highly ranked. But even then, the Cubs could have totally outbid us if they were really that persistent on getting Tucker, because like I said, they had 8 top 100 prospects prior to trading away Cam Smith. And ironically, Cam Smith at 73rd on the top 100 was the last of their 8 top 100 prospects. Yeah. So they could have done a lot more, but it probably would have looked like Schmidt just because of the position, Schmidt, Tibbs, and then you're probably throwing in another arm as well. You might be throwing in like
did they throw a pitcher in there?
It wasn't. I don't think it was it definitely wasn't a top 100 guy that they threw in there.
So maybe Schmidt ends up being equivalent to whatever the pitcher they threw in, and then we're having to toss in one of our, a Birdsong or a Harrison in the deal, and that's hard. I mean, I don't know if the Giants can really afford that, especially if he walks. If you extended him, you'd live with it no matter what. You'd be like, this is fine. But if you can't extend him and he walks, like, this does more damage to the Giants than it does to the Cubs, just like because like what Ricky said, they have so many top 100 guys that they can take this risk, and if it doesn't, they're like, whatever. So obviously, if a guy becomes a star, they're not going to like it, but
Yeah, see, they ended up sending a big league arm, Hayden Wisniewski, and he was a guy that actually had good numbers. So the Giants would have been looking at trading, or maybe even like a Roop or and then probably another guy on top of that. The Cubs just had the depth to trade from is the issue. And the Giants could have pulled that deal off, but the Cubs could have easily matched and then gone way further with it if they really wanted to.
Yeah, potentially. This could have been enough. It's just a matter of what they preferred. But then, like you said, Cubs might have gone over that. They might have just upped the offer again. So it's hard to know. We're not in the room. We're not taking the calls. We're not fielding the offers or anything. We don't know exactly what each team offered. But they do have more capital. This is reality.
Yeah. And it's just the Giants aren't necessarily in the best position to be trading away that many assets for a guy with 1 year left. I mean, he's a great player, but there's just a lot of risk. You just got Tibbs in the first round, and he's a guy you're hoping comes up quickly and can plug, left or right field up for you. this year or next year, hopefully very quickly. So
I'm excited to see what Tibbs does this season.
Yeah.
Man, I especially getting to see him for a full year. I know there's a lot of people that don't like the athletic profile. I understand it. He's not necessarily the athletic freak that you would want with a pick like that. But I do think a lot of people still are underrating his tools, especially his hit tools. Like, he's a good contact guy. He's got really plus power as well. We'll see. I think he's a guy that once he can have a full season to show what he can do, I think it might change opinions. And I do want to see how he does against lefties on the full season after he gets a full spring training and he just plays the whole year. I want to see what that looks like, because there are a lot of people that are adamant that he just can't hit lefties. And I don't know. I feel like guys can improve. I think too many people discount the ability of players to improve and develop. So I want to see what it looks like over the course of a full season with him.
And I mean, talking on that front, look at it this way. Yeah, Jock Peterson for 2 years. Yes, I know a lot of Giants fans hate Jock Peterson. But, I mean, ultimately, that guy was brought in as a strictly platoon hitter. And, I mean, look at the kind of value he can bring to a team, though, with his power. And look how often he was playing for the Giants as strictly just a platoon hitter against righties. He was playing about 80% of your games, damn near, because there's a lot of teams that just do not have lefty pitching. So you got to keep that in mind too. It's like, yes, ideally you don't want a first round pick coming in or getting pulled late in games because you don't want him to face a lefty. But early in a guy's career, that's not really the craziest thing ever if you're getting him up to the big league level within a year and a half of pro baseball. So I think that can be a little bit overblown. I mean, if you have a guy like him who just absolutely mashes righty pitching, that's fine, in my opinion. I mean, you didn't draft him top 5
round, but
yeah.
You didn't draft him top 5. So it's like, righties make up 70% of pitchers in baseball.
Exactly.
Like, if he can just be semi decent against lefties and crush righties, we would take that. He can be a little below average against lefties. I think you don't want him to be unplayable against lefties. That would be a problem. But
yeah,
and I agree with Frederick. The striking out 38% of the time in high A, that was troubling. But this is, it's a very small sample size, and it is a big jump in competition.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, for any of you guys that watched our interview with Charlie Zacconi, he said it, and I think not Jacob Christian. We've heard it from other guys as well. They say, they get to San Jose right after being drafted, and it's very similar to college in a sense. You get a mix of, ex-college guys, and you get some high school guys, and you got a lot of guys that are out there throwing. They're not necessarily pitching because they don't know where a lot of their secondary pitches are going. And then you get up to high A and it's a lot more advanced and it's a lot more like strictly, D1 type college talent getting up there. So it is a little bit of an adjustment, and you just can't go off of a bad 2 weeks of baseball at one level for a guy who literally just finished up a long college season. You know what I mean? So we got to give him more time, but it's totally understandable. You don't want to see a guy striking out 38% of the time in A ball.
Yeah. Never a good sign, but he didn't really have the time to adjust. And, he did finish the season strong, which was nice. Like, the power finally showed up. He hit 2 just kind of tanks of homers, and we'll see how he does next season. I think we could see him rise quick. Wouldn't shock me if they start him in high A again next season. And, we'll go from there. But we're going to move on over to the international stuff for a few minutes because this is actually kind of an interesting situation. So the Giants are obviously chasing Roki Sasaki. He is likely going to wait until after January 15th to sign with the team. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if he has an agreement in place beforehand, but he is going to probably wait till at least the 15th to sign, because then he can get access to basically a team's entire 2025 international bonus pool. So that's probably going to be when he signs. Otherwise, he's only limited to whatever a team has left from 2024, which is pretty, it's pretty limited. Most of these teams have already given out most of their pools. So the Giants currently have the number 2 guy an agreement with, and the number 24 guy. And there's one more that I'd need to go find. I think he's from like Venezuela, you mentioned. Jeff Young, I can't remember the name, but they have Josué Gonzalez and Gene McCarnes. And it's tough because you would 100% probably go with a Sasaki. Like, you take the bird in the hand. If he wants to come, you're going to take the 23-year-old with a ton of potential to be an ace. But I will say this. And it's a 16-year-old. I get it. It's a prospect. It's so much projection. But who's the last prospect the Giants had with the kind of tools that Gonzalez has? And I will say, if he becomes a superstar somewhere for another organization because you passed on him for Sasaki, like, that would hurt me to my soul. Like, honestly, because when you're a guy that's getting comps to guys like Lindor and, Jose Reyes, etc., like, that would kill me because this organization has not had a 5-tool type player in so long. And this is a guy that has 5+ tools. So potentially, he's a prospect. He could flame out. We'll see. But it's just tough. It's like, I don't want to say I don't want Roki to come, but man, if it costs you Gonzalez, like, that's going to suck. And it probably will.
Yeah, it probably will, because, I mean, you figure a guy like Sasaki, who, because of the weird posting rules and him being under 25, you're looking at a guy who is more than likely going to end up taking all of your pool money, and he's going to try to get the most he can get on a minor league deal, on top of endorsements. But, it's not easy to be able to pull in a very young player on a very cheap deal like Gonzalez with, 5-tool potential, that you can have under control for years, where Sasaki could be an Ohtani situation where, you get him for, a few years, and then because of that minor league deal, you're losing him like Ohtani, and then he ends up going and signing somewhere else on a massive deal because he hasn't got paid yet. Now, of course, there's far more risk with, Gonzalez because of his age and where he's coming from, kind of like Luciano, same type of deal. But, it, like you mentioned many times, you don't want that to be what hurts you going forward, with a lot of other guys not wanting to sign with the Giants because they don't trust that they're going to stick to their word. I mean, Gonzalez is a kid that's already repping all Giant stuff all over his Instagram and workouts and everything. He's trying to recruit his younger brother over to the Giants. That, I just feel like it would be a really bad look. Ultimately, I would be stoked if Sasaki came. I think he'll help you win right now as a 23-year-old and has, ace potential. Absolutely. I mean, the guy 2 years ago was averaging 99 miles an hour on his fastball and has 2 nasty secondary pitches. So it's kind of a win-win situation, but I would hate to see them really hurt themselves with the international market going forward, because that's something the Giants really struggled with for a long time, even when they were winning World Series. But like Daniel says, odds are Sasaki probably goes to like a New York, a Boston, San Diego. I think we both agree he probably doesn't go to the Dodgers anymore, so that's a win, given how full the rotation is. But I mean, hey, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, there'd be plenty of marketing opportunities for him to make some money while on a minor league deal. So don't completely count it out, especially if Burnes does go to Toronto. It is not totally out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. The one thing the Giants have always done well is market their players. And they usually will take, players notice that. So a guy like Sasaki would probably recognize in this market that he can make a ton of money. I do think LA is unlikely. As Ricky said, their rotation's pretty full. And also with Yamamoto and Ohtani already there, it's going to limit his marketing or his sponsorship and endorsement opportunities and all that stuff. So he makes a lot more sense going to a team like Boston, Chicago, the Giants, San Diego even, although I kind of wonder how San Diego would compete with the other teams from an endorsement standpoint, but, SoCal, he could still make money there. Yeah. So, we'll see. Like I said, I just, part of me hopes he just kind of goes to like Boston or something, just not even in the NL West, and the Giants can keep the guys that they've had commitments with. And I just have some concerns. I don't know if it would end up damaging it or not, but I have some concerns on the potential, what damage it could do to the trust of players if you back out of your commitments to sign this guy at the 11th hour. Like, I do have some concerns there.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, all along, I've kind of had my mind made up that I wouldn't be upset wherever Sasaki went, because I all along was assuming it'd be the Dodgers. But signing Blake Snell obviously completely changed all of that, because I think while we thought Snell to the Dodgers was a possibility, I think we thought he might come back here or go to San Diego again. I think that completely changes everything. So, I mean, honestly, just Sasaki not going to the Dodgers, I think from a Giants fan perspective, is already a huge win as is. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And ultimately, you kind of got to pick your poison here. With Burnes, you're going to be losing another 2 draft picks. You're going to lose, your 3rd and 6th rounders, another $1 million in pool money. And obviously you're going to be forking out a ton of cash. So you're going to get hurt either way. But ultimately, this is what us Giants fans have been wanting for the last 6 years now. Start bringing in high-end talent, fill out the top end of that roster. So,
and you know what? If you do get Burnes, they need to address the offense still. But if you do get Burnes and then Sasaki comes, like I've said it, like those are 3 guys. If you have Webb, Burnes, and Sasaki in whatever order, those are 3 guys that you could genuinely go play, an LA in the playoffs or whoever. And if your pitching is shutting them down, like, you have a chance. And you're not going to be favored, but you have a chance. So, I mean, there is massive positivity. Yeah. And Robbie Ray, if he's your 4th, like that's really solid. You wouldn't be like severely overmatched from a starting pitching standpoint in every game. So you'd have a chance, we'll see. So.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, I think, again, you get Burnes and you don't get Sasaki. I think you're also looking at, like we said, you get Gonzalez and you get, was it Macaris or Masaris, the outfielder from Aruba? Yeah. So if you get those 2 guys in, plus the other guy that Jeff mentioned before, you're looking at 3 high-end international prospects in one class. You're immediately going to bump up your farm system quite a bit, especially considering Gonzalez is basically the number 1 prospect. I mean, Sasaki, it's like we don't even really include him with those other guys because he's way more developed. He's hardly even a prospect.
He's 23.
Yeah.
And has played pro ball for like 5 years or 6 years or something like that.
High level pro ball. So, I mean, Gonzalez is basically the number 1 prospect. So he's going to go way up the rankings in your farm system, and the Giants desperately need that, considering you have Bryce at the top, who is very close to scratching the surface of the big leagues, and you have Tibbs, who obviously a bunch of you guys have already mentioned there's some concerns with his strikeout rate, and then it starts to fall off from there because you've had a lot of these guys graduate from prospect status. So
and the Giants do have, like, I will say to everybody, they do have some toolsy guys. Like the last couple of years, Farhan did draft some very toolsy players that could potentially be guys that shoot up the prospect rankings if they start producing in the lower levels. A guy like Walker Martin, guys like Johnny Level, guys like Rainer Arias, guys like Dakota Jordan's a good one if he hits, because of his raw power and speed, power, speed. Like that's a guy that could end up really shooting up. They think he can stick in center field, I've seen. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I kind of see him more as a right fielder personally, but they think he could stick in center. Like, those are the kinds of guys that can really shoot up prospect rankings if they start producing like quickly. So, they're not without potential in their system right now, even though it is so poorly rated. And that's part of the problem, is just because all of those super toolsy players are all in like A ball or rookie ball right now. They all are recent draft picks. So we'll see, how they do next season. There's a lot of guys I'm excited to watch in the minors next year. And, hopefully we watch their system suddenly start producing some top 100 guys, because that would go a long way for this team building a sustainable winner and having assets to make big trades like the Cubs did today. So, we'll see.
Yeah, and for the people who are less optimistic about, instead of getting Sasaki, going and getting, a 16-year-old future shortstop with all the tools in the world, he's gonna instantly be a top 100 prospect, most likely, because of his status already. And when you factor that in, if you're smart with the way you use your prospects and you look at them as assets like the Dodgers have for years, you go and flip those guys and you go and get yourself a Mookie Betts and get a guy like that who will re-sign with you once he realizes what the organization is like and how they run. So you don't have to hold on to these guys. You just trade them while their value's at their peak if you can get generational type talent that's already proven at the big league level. That's where they've really dropped the ball with Luciano. They've had their chances where they could have moved him off of his, shortstop position, or they could have traded him while he was extremely productive down in, San Jose and Eugene, and even showing flashes in Richmond. So, it's all about just stacking assets, obviously Sasaki would be great, but this guy can bring a ton of value to the organization as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the Dodgers have shown it time and time again with how many big trades they've made for productive players on their roster. And the Giants do need to get back to doing that, or have that ability, because they've shown an ability to re-sign guys once they get them in the door. It's always been getting them in the door, but when they've traded for guys, they've had no problems. The ones they wanted to keep around, they've had no issues getting them to sign back. I think back to guys like Hunter Pence. I think back to guys like, I think Freddie Sanchez, they extended for a couple of years at one point. Guys like going back to like Jason Schmidt and some of those guys back in the day, like they've had players that they've traded for in this park and had no issues getting them to re-sign because the guy loved playing here. So it's prior to Farhan, prior to all the platoon, the extreme platooning and all the different stuff like that. Like, this was viewed as an organization that was a first-class organization and how it treated players. So once they got them in the door, a lot of guys fell in love with playing for this organization, and they can keep them. So hopefully they can get back to that. That'd be a great way for this team to finally start acquiring some stars. And we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, and speaking of the draft, I think we wanted to touch a little bit on the draft lottery. What were your thoughts on that, with the Giants moving down from 9 to, I believe, 13?
It sucked. I swear, I feel like every year, no matter what sport, it's why I've always hated the lottery systems. Like, I don't think I've ever had a team that I root for that like ever has good luck in the lottery. Maybe the Sharks last season are like the only team that's ever had like good luck in this area in the draft lottery. And I mean, the A's even got kind of screwed last season in the lottery. Now they got a great prospect in Kurtz, but it's just, I don't know, man. It sucks. They dropped 4 spots, which is brutal. And especially if you go sign a Corbin Burnes, you're going to have only your first and fourth round pick in the first 6 rounds. So that 13th overall pick is going to be like, that's really your bullet in that draft. Like, you better hit on that if you're going to sign a Burnes, because between him and Gonzalez and Macaris, like, you need some of those guys to be, high-end prospects, because otherwise your system's going to take a while to recover. Now, someone mentioned earlier, screw the picks, who cares? Like, I agree to an extent. Like, they're almost at the point of, if you're going to make a commitment to winning, like, that's fine. It's almost better off to just blow up all the picks in one draft and just be like, yeah, you know what, we're not going to do much to help our system this year, but we're going to set ourselves up to be able to like attract other players, and then we'll fix the farm. But it is something that needs to be done. Like they do need to find a way to improve the farm, and dropping 4 picks in the draft sure ain't helping. So.
Yeah, I was really hoping the Giants were going to be one of those teams. Like, I think it was the Cardinals had a huge jump up into like the top 5. I was really hoping that they could get a lucky break their way like that, because like you said, it puts such a huge emphasis on getting an MLB player out of that first round pick. And it kind of goes back into what we talked about for any of you guys that watched when we discussed the draft this last year when they took Tibbs. Like, Cody and I were very adamant about them not taking one of these high school arms, because you need a guy when you're in this position to be able to get through the minors a lot quicker. You don't really have the luxury of sitting on a high school arm who could be a project with all this, potential. But ultimately, you might be waiting 6 years on this 18-year-old kid or 19-year-old kid to come up, and you just don't have that kind of luxury. So you kind of do pigeonhole yourself. And for, the people that didn't like the Tibbs pick, I mean, he really was the best available there. You could have taken, the kid that the Cubs took, Tibbs' teammate, the third baseman, Cam Smith. Same thing. He had plenty of holes in his swing as well, and he was a righty bat. And I felt like Tibbs at the time was a lot better of a fit for what the Giants needed. You have Chapman here, and ultimately, if you're looking at some kid that could come up in the next couple of years, Tibbs, and being a lefty and an outfielder, just made a lot more sense for them at the time. So, yeah. And again, that goes back into, if you don't get Sasaki, getting Gonzalez on the international market is going to be huge for your farm system, because that can kind of help aid you when you're not getting as many top prospects in the draft early on, Yeah.
Smith, Frederick, I agree. Like, Smith was higher rated on some of the boards, and if we're looking at the players like assets, I mean, because he would have been blocked potentially both at third and first, if considering the Giants' best prospect is a first baseman and getting pretty close. But if we view him as an asset, like, that could have been potentially, if he had another good year next season and all of a sudden jumps into like the top 50, it would have been a really attractive piece to potentially trade. I mean, obviously he was a big piece of the Tucker deal. So, we'll see kind of, what happens. Tibbs is ranked number 88 on MLB.com's list. I don't know where he's ranked on Baseball America or any of that stuff, but he's 88 on MLB.com's list. And if he has a really good first half when they do shake up the rankings later in the season, don't be shocked if he's in like the 60s or the 50s. So, we'll kind of see how he does next season. And even if we don't think he was the right pick, and even if, you don't think long-term he ends up being the best player because of, his splits against lefties or his defense or whatever, he's still a guy that you might be able to swing in a trade. Like you might be able to flip him and he'd have some really solid value at that point. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, ultimately this international haul is going to be huge for the team. Like I said, I also like to compare it to back in the 2010s when the Giants system got really weak after all these guys graduated. The guys we all know, Timmy, Kane, Bum, all these guys that came from our system. One thing that the Giants did not do a very good job of in those years was going through the international market. So that was another reason. It was both trading away high-end prospects. It was also not drafting well, but it was also not being as involved in the top end of the international market. So I think that is one way that they can kind of get by while they go and try to get in these veteran guys on qualifying offers where they're losing picks. It'll kind of help them in the long run where it won't hurt as bad. So
this is interesting. Tuning Schmidt at first. I mean, okay, my honest feelings, it's a complete waste of his defensive ability to put him at first base. But if you got him in the lineup, at least for now, like, I'd be happy with that, because I do feel like Fitz is a giant question mark going into next season. I'm not I've already spoken my piece on Fitzgerald and his whiff rate and his strikeout rate and everything, and his inability to consistently make contact with pitches in the zone. But he does bring a lot of things the team needs. He has some nice power, especially at the pull side. He has really great speed. He has some good upside at second base, but I feel like Schmidt honestly is a better defensive second baseman than Fitz is. And I think Schmidt, if he continues improving his plate discipline, it actually is the safer play offensively. Like, that's just kind of how I feel long-term going forward. But yeah, I mean, if it got him in the lineup more, I mean, I'm not against that. I think Schmidt just needs to be ready to go into the offseason and trying to win a job wherever that is. If that's just a bench job, he'll get some starts, because Bob Melvin has mentioned that they want to try and get Chapman and Ramos in particular, and now probably Adames. Like, these are guys that play damn near every day, and they want to get these guys some games in the DH spot out of the field. So if Chapman's going to get some games as a DH this season, Schmidt is a guy that's not really a downgrade defensively. Like, he's that good defensively. He's almost every bit as good as Chapman is at the hot corner. It's just not as proven with the bat. That's why he's a bench player right now. So, we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's honestly an interesting segue into kind of just reiterating some of the stuff we've talked about in the past, which is, the Giants really need to identify here in the next month or so what the plan is at not just first base, but with that group of, Lamont Wade Jr., Wilmer Flores, and Yastrzemski. Yastrzemski may not be as impacted just being in the outfield and with his defense. But I mean, ultimately, you at least got to figure out what you're going to do with Wade and Flores. Are you going to just go and platoon those two there, or are you going to open up a spot for a younger guy, or are you going to bring in a guy like Santana? Because ultimately, I think they need to decide that quick, because if you are interested in moving on from those guys and bringing in someone like Santana for his bat, you're going to want to make that decision here pretty soon, because I have a pretty good feeling a guy like Santana is going to go relatively quickly to possibly one of these smaller market teams that are looking to, upgrade over at first base offensively while not having to break the bank for that upgrade. So that's something you kind of want to figure out relatively quickly here. And like I said, Lamont Wade he does bring some positive things, but he shouldn't be in a full-time role like the Giants have been using him, but he can still be a good trade asset given, he's still pretty cheap for some of these small market teams. If you do want to work out a trade, obviously he gets on base at a good clip and he has improved at first. I don't think he's an above average defensive first baseman or an outfielder for that matter, but he does give you a little bit of versatility at least. And he can be
average first.
Yeah, he can be a quality reserve though. So I think they really need to figure out what they're going to do there. And it's like, even with Flores, it's more of the same thing. It's like, are we going to trust that last year was strictly because of injury? Or is that more of the way that Flores is headed at this point in his career? And he's already not a very good defender. Obviously he was initially brought in a utility role, but we've seen he just, even with Chapman at third, you can't trust him at third base. I wouldn't feel comfortable with him at second, and even at first he's gotten better, but he's not great. So it's like, ultimately, if Wilmer's not hitting pretty damn well in a platoon role, why is he here? So I plain and simple think you got to move off those guys. You got to find something. I mean, I think there are teams that would take both those guys on. I'm not saying you'd get anything noteworthy for either of them, but like Wade, for example, he could absolutely be packaged in a trade with a prospect and get you something okay, just a small marginal upgrade over there. And a guy like we've said in the past, like Yandy Diaz, I think the Rays are a perfect fit in a trade for, if you're shipping out Lamont Wade Jr. because he's cheap and would fill a good spot for them. I think they would platoon him and use him more appropriately. and you send a prospect their way too and make it worthwhile for them. And then you bring a guy like Yandy Diaz back who, while he's not an above average defender at first base, he's a great bat. He's consistent. He hits for a high average, and he's going to put the bat on the ball. And that's ultimately what the Giants need a little bit more of as they, continue to fill out this lineup this offseason.
Yeah, you can do Diaz. I mean, we brought up Goldschmidt a few times.
Yeah.
Goldschmidt, he's 37 years old. And I mean, I just pulled up his last few years because I was just kind of out of curiosity. Obviously, he won an MVP in 2022. He's not that guy anymore. But
no,
there are plenty of guys. Like, this is a guy that just 2 years ago in 2023, he had an 810 OPS. He was 120 OPS plus. Like, he was 20% better than league average. He has some upside. Like, there are guys like, yes, do I want to count on an older guy to turn back the clock? No, I'm not going to. But there have been plenty of guys that are a little bit older that on like a cheap 1-year deal, like come out and have a great year. And I could easily see a Paul Goldschmidt playing in San Francisco where he's had a lot of success, being a really good defensive, first baseman for them, and having a high 700s OPS or even like a low 700s and hitting 20 to 24 homers and just being a decent bat in the 5 or 6 spot in the lineup. Like, he has some upside to at least help this lineup for a year in the short term, especially if you go and get a Burnes. And I would rather get Yandy Diaz, like you said, but I'm just saying, like, he is an option for you guys.
And goalie's an above average glove at first too, to go along with, Chapman and Adames, and then you maybe eventually Schmidt ends up getting some more playing time at second base, and you have a damn good infield, and obviously Bailey as well behind the dish. But I'm not the hugest fan of bringing in Goldschmidt, but I mean, if they truly feel that more than likely Bryce is going to be down in AAA for most of the year, I don't have a huge issue with it. It's just, it could get a little bit more awkward if Bryce just, tears the cover off the ball and is just destroying AAA pitching, which isn't out of the realm of possibility. And you're wanting to bring him up, and then you have like possibly a future Hall of Famer or a damn, close one in Goldschmidt filling up a spot at first base. It could get a little awkward. That's where a guy like Santana is probably a little bit, better of a fit, because I think he's going to be a little bit more willing to kind of do whatever to help the team. And then you can just kind of throw him over at in the DH spot here and there if Bryce does end up coming up in the second half.
Well, and that's the one thing, like, even with Goldschmidt, I think, like, with the DH spot, whether you put Bryce there, if it was like a second half play, like, you could put Bryce in the DH spot for the second half. You put Goldschmidt in the DH spot. You can kind of rotate them through that, where one of them's playing the field a few days, 1 or 2 days a week. Like, they could make it work. I'm not saying I like one guy over the other. I think Santana's probably a better fit just because he switch hits, and they need the lefty.
That too.
Mm-hmm. Yandy Diaz, doesn't he switch it as well? Or am I misremembering that one?
I think he's just a righty.
Just a righty. Okay, so Yandy is, I think, the best of the group, just from a probably, we can call it predictive performance. Like, I think he's probably the most reliable bet of the three.
Yeah, he's just a righty.
He's cheap. I don't know why for some reason I thought he switch hit. I knew he hit from the right side for sure. I just wasn't sure if he hit from both. But he's a really solid player. But I'd be happy with really any of those three. Like, I'd be fine, especially on like 1-year deals for either Goldschmidt or Santana. Like, a 1-year deal, like, that's fine because it's easy to trade those guys at the deadline if they have even a decent first half, or whenever when Bryce is ready, or you can just stick him in the DH spot, or stick Bryce in the DH spot for half the year and then turn first base over him to him next season. So, we'll see, but they do need to address first base. I think Florida for sure. I'm open to Harar getting reps at first and as a DH if they want to try and platoon Wade with someone again, but I can't it's not that I don't like Wade. Like to me, he's a very solid bench piece, but his body just does not hold up. And every year he's dealing with so many injuries, and his main skill is getting on base, but he's super slow. Like that just does not sit well with me. When your skill is to get on base, but then you're just a complete clog on the paths when you're there. So I need to see more power out of him. I need to see him doing some more damage to go with getting on base, like for it to justify it for me.
Yeah, I mean, personally, all along, I mean, Yandy Diaz has been my number one option to fill that void just because I think he's another guy you can say screw the damn platoons, and it's another guy you can put in an everyday role and you just have that continuity up and down the lineup, and we're getting back to real baseball. And again, a guy that's not going to strike out a ton. He's going to give you a really professional at bat. And these are the guys you want if you're going to get into a wild card spot and you're going to get into the playoffs. Like, those are the guys you want in playoff baseball that are going to give you consistency and quality at bats. But ultimately, it's not only that, but he's 33. He's a little bit younger than the other two guys we mentioned. He's only making $10 million, so he's not really hurting you at all money-wise. And guess what? Next year, if you still have some questions about Bryce, or maybe he gets some serious injury, guess what? You bring him back on a club option next year for $12 million, and you're still doing just fine money-wise, because that is an absolute bargain for a guy that hits as consistently as Yandy does. So, and there's just tons of ways you can make that kind of trade work. So, in my opinion,
Yandy's just like a better version of Wade, honestly. Like, that hits right-handed.
Yeah, and if Wade,
everybody, like,
if Wade could be that guy, he would be a much better player. Like, we're not just certified Lamont Wade Jr. haters because we just don't like him because Farhan got him or something. He can be a quality player. It's very frustrating when every year, even if the guy is playing, 120, 130 games, he's playing through injury. And like Cody said, it's not even that Lamont Wade is necessarily slow. He's always dealing with these soft tissue injuries where he's becoming a station-to-station player, and he's just clogging the bases. And that has been such an enormous issue for the Giants offense, is these guys that are just station to station hitting nothing but singles or striking out. And it's like, where is the upside in that offense? So you got to figure it out at that position.
With him hitting at the top of the lineup last season, or near the top of the lineup, someone needs to find how many times Ramos or Chapman hit doubles with him on first and he didn't score. Like, somebody needs to find
Can't
that.
have it.
Because I swear to God, it felt like every time he was on first and someone hit a double, he was on third. It was like, it kills me. So it's not that I don't like the guy. I don't like his fit with the Giants specifically. I think he would be better on a team that hits a lot more homers and has a just much better top to bottom offense. I think he would be a great fit in a team like Atlanta. I've mentioned them in the past. Cubs might be a good fit. He might be a good fit with the Yankees. I don't like their top to bottom lineup, but they do have power. Like, there are places that he would be a great fit. I just don't like it in San Francisco. I don't think he's a great fit in this place.
And that's why I feel like in a Yandy Diaz type trade, he's such a good fit, because he brings value to a lot of different teams. It's just, I don't think he fits the Giants roster well. They need power out of a position like first base. That is a position every other team expects to have power. And, while Wade did show a little bit of that back in 2021, he hasn't been that guy since. He only had 8 home runs last year. And this is a guy that was starting a lot of games for us. You can't have that. You have to add more power, because ultimately when you're trying to get through the long haul of a 162 game season, you've got to be able to hit power. You can't rely on only hitting with runners in scoring position every single game. You got to find different ways to win games. Sometimes all it takes is that 3-run homer and you win that 3-1 game on a cold night in San Francisco. So you got to you got to add more versatility to the team, and you got to add more power.
Yeah, and you know what, Ed? We actually brought this up as a possibility. Like, what if the Rays took? Ricky mentioned this on a previous video. Like, what if the Rays wanted Wade plus like a mid-tier prospect or something back? Like, basically, they cut their salary commitment in half, and they get a prospect out of it for Diaz. Like that would be a kind of, it could potentially be a win-win. They get a
Black or a Roop.
Yeah, I can't say I personally put Roop in there. I like Roop, but like maybe McDonald or Black or someone like that.
Yeah, someone in that range. I think Roop is my favorite of that group of guys, but I wouldn't lose sleep over losing any of those guys in Lamont Wade Jr. and getting an upgrade at first base and having a stable presence at the corner. And that goes kind of back into what we were saying earlier. You can afford to really let this young group of guys kind of play it out and earn roles at the big league level at a few spots. You just can't do it at half of the spots in the field. You can have Ramos and Lee holding down 2 outfield spots, and then you can platoon or play some young guys in left. And you can do the same thing at second base with like Schmidt and Fitzgerald, but lock something down at first base and get something solidified there, and you're in a lot better position.
Yeah. I think realistically we're down to like 2 platoons right now. I mean, I don't count catcher. Catcher is just always a position that your starter's not going to play more than 110, 120 games in a season, like in a year. But first and right field, that seems to be the only platoon right now. Everything else, it seems like they're trending towards an everyday player, and then just trying to get you utilize the DH spot to get those players rest while keeping them in the lineup. And so that is a nice step in the right direction at least. And Frederick says if they trade for Arias, he's going to jump off the scoreboard into the Covey Cove. I'm pretty sure that's a longer jump than you think. But you make sure you take a video. That'd be hilarious.
If you make it out okay, don't hurt yourself over Luis Arias. Who was it that just mentioned? Oh, George mentioned trading for Josh Naylor. That is actually something we brought up not that long ago because there was rumors of that. Naylor is a rental though. I wouldn't have an issue with it because I do think he is somebody you could get to agree to an extension. Now, would I trade Rainer Arias for a guy like that? Probably not, because guy has a very high ceiling and is very young still. I'd feel pretty awful if we got rid of a high ceiling guy like that for a 1-year rental, especially if Naylor's not coming back long term. And you do have to keep in mind too, with Bryce coming relatively soon, if you do lock up Naylor, he's pretty much just going to clog the DH spot like Soler did last year. So that's the other downfall. I like Naylor, the player. I'm not sure it's the best fit long term unless you can get him at a good price on that 1-year deal and then kind of let him play his way into a possible extension. I wouldn't be super opposed to it. Just me personally, I'm really big on Rainer Arias. So I personally would not trade a guy like that because Arias is a guy that you could absolutely see jump into the top 100 prospects this year with a nice year. He didn't play a ton last year and the results were kind of up and down, but he's a guy we could see skyrocket across MLB rankings.
He's had 2 wrist injuries back to back.
Yeah, that's pretty rough,
especially for hitters. Like that kills you. So I'm hoping like he's super healthy. Maybe they tell him stop diving at everything in the outfield so he doesn't hurt his wrist next season. He's still got to play the way he plays. It is what it is. But I'm a firm believer, just like you, that if he has a healthy season next year, he could just skyrocket up prospect rankings if he's healthy and producing. And I do expect us to see him at in San Jose in full season ball right out the gate, and I'm excited to get to watch him, nightly. So that'll be great. I agree. Naylor is 27 for anybody wondering. Next season's his age 28 season. It's like 27 and a half right now. So, I mean, yeah, the extension would probably end up being way too expensive in all reality. But for 1 year at what, 14 million or something like that, you said, I could live with that. I mean, he'd be a good lefty bat to have in this lineup. And I do think with Cleveland, they like to stock up on arms. So I could see them wanting pitching coming back, honestly.
For sure. Yeah, so, 14.2 million for Naylor for just the one season.
Yeah.
Hey, Naylor always looks at it
as bad as he wants, but if he rakes, I don't care. That's all I want to see. I don't dislike Andrew Vaughn. That'd be a super low, probably it's low cost to get him. I don't think it would cost you an arm and a leg to get him. You might have to send kind of a similar. I wonder if we have anybody that'd be like a kind of fit his mold, kind of falling out of maybe a Luciano for Andrew Vaughn swap. You might have to add a little prospect because Vaughn does have a 30 homer season, I think, a couple years ago.
Yeah, I mean he's a solid big leaguer. He needs to get out of that situation. But yeah, Vaughn's actually from right up near where I live. Had some friends that played high school ball with him.
Yeah.
Camilo for Andrew Vaughn. Oh, that's an interesting trade. Doval for Andrew Vaughn
with the White Sox. Actually, that's actually not a bad trade for the White Sox.
That's a very interesting trade, honestly.
You could bring him in, let him close on a crappy team if he gets his stuff right, and then they could turn around and flip Doval mid-season for probably more than they'd ever have traded Vaughn for. I don't know. It'd be interesting. Torkelson's, I think, the other guy that's kind of fallen out of favor in Detroit.
Yeah. He's a little higher ceiling player.
Yeah.
He's a little higher ceiling player than Andrew Vaughn at this point. I mean, he's shown off the power a lot more than Vaughn has. But Vaughn's a guy who has very good contact rates, and I honestly think, he has a lot of pop too. I mean, he was a top 3 pick. I think he's somebody that could really take off in a better environment than the White Sox. I mean, it's pretty bad. I mean, we talked with Charlie Zacconi about that one, and that's the situation any player would probably struggle in. I mean, we saw Vargas from the Dodgers, one of their top prospects, get shipped over there, and he did horrible.
Yeah.
So
it's hard. I mean, the White Sox are a perfect example of why you do need some veterans that are like winners in a clubhouse still, because they just that team stinks, and it feels like nobody's holding anybody accountable anywhere on the field. So it's hard. But yeah, you know what? It's like 10:30. I think we should probably wrap this up. As Ricky mentioned, I was planning on only doing this till about 10, and we're about 30 minutes later than that. But as Ricky mentioned, we did have that Charlie Zacconi interview on Monday. So for those of you that missed it, go check it out. It's under the live shows. Charlie was super cool. For those San Francisco fans in here, you're just going to have to overlook the Detroit Lions hat or beanie he had on. Sorry. He is a Midwestern guy. Although it's pretty funny because I guess he's from the Chicago area and he grew up a Lions fan. So it was kind of funny talking to him about that. But go check that out, everyone. Nick, I hope so. That'd be awesome for anybody enjoys the content. Please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. We do try and put out live shows every Friday is our goal during the off season. During the season, I don't know. We'll talk about it. I'll talk with these guys. Maybe we'll try and do it on off days. Maybe we'll do it every Friday still, regardless of what's going on. I don't know. We'll kind of coordinate that. I do still want to put out the minor league updates during the season. We'll get those rolling again. But other than that, we're still working on getting some different guests. We were hopeful to have one tonight. Didn't work out. Hopefully next week. But yeah, appreciate everybody jumping in here with us.
All right.
And Rick, just so you know, for anybody, please do Send Dan all your love and support. For those of you that do follow him on X, his dad had successful surgery and everything, and they're at the hospital right now. So hopefully everything's going well with him. I'll let him kind of share all the info though, but follow his X account. It's like at Caveman Dan 97 or something like that. I don't remember the exact handle there, but go ahead and follow him for updates there. But it sounds like it's doing well. So
and Daniel says, "See ya, John Boy."
Yeah. Okay. So funny story. Before I go, I shared this with Ricky. First of all,
it's pretty spot on.
Yeah, honestly, somebody pulled up. For those of you that didn't see this, during the Charlie Ciccone interview, it almost broke me mid-interview because somebody told me I looked like John Boy. Let's see. He doesn't wear the hat backwards usually, but that's probably a good thing. Why is he like awkward smiling in all of these? Hold on. Maybe when my beard grays up a little bit. Somebody in the live show told me I looked like John Boy.
You guys could be brothers.
and then somebody else at my work told me that I looked like Silent Bob. Obviously when he was younger, but and not the long hair, but you know what? I at least appreciate it.
Oh my god. The comparisons are great.
So, you know what? I appreciate you guys bringing the humor to the chat.
Going forward, Cody will be Silent Bob. He will not be talking. It'll just be all head nods, and me and Dan will be doing all the talking going forward.
I don't know if I could get through a whole episode without saying anything. I don't know if I could. I'd just be sitting here like I'd probably make it about 5 minutes. I don't know if I can do it.
Oh man.
Oh, man. All right.
I'll make sure I don't wear my Rolex out in public, man.
Dude, I saw a thing yesterday where it was like, where it was like Willie Adames is really like where San Francisco is headed, and it looks a lot better in the last year or two. And then it was like Ricky Pearsall thinks it could use a little bit more improvement.
Yeah.
Dude, that's brutal. Oh god. Silent Bob and his eyelashes. God. Oh damn. All right, you guys are killing me. All right, appreciate all you guys. We're gonna get out of here. You guys have a great Friday night. Enjoy your weekend, and hopefully we'll be able to break. We'll have some Burnes news break this weekend. If it does, we'll probably try and jump on live. It might not be right away, like with Adames. I was out of town until that night, so we'll try and coordinate something if it does happen this weekend. But other than that, you guys will probably hear from me on Monday. So have a great night, everybody, and go Giants.
All right. Thanks, guys.